this is just the kind of song, that can make something pedestrian feel majestic, and that's sort of my wheelhouse.
You will hear what that song is today, along with some other incredible tunes. That is Rob Harvilla, who is today's guest. He has been a professional rock critic for over 20 years, writing for publications like Pitchfork, Spin, and Rolling Stone. He's also the host of the wildly popular podcast 60 Songs That Explain the 90s, which now has expanded to cover the 2000s. And he's the author of a book by the same name, which I read and loved, and then felt compelled to invite him on the show to share this list you're going to hear today. And to be honest, the show turned out exactly as I expected it would, which is to say, it was an incredibly fun conversation about the intersection of music and travel, featuring Rob's essential 90s road trip playlist, including his number one road trip song of all time. And I'll reveal my personal number one road trip album of all time and the story behind that and loads more. This is a fun one. Strap in. Thanks for being here. And welcome to the Zero to Travel podcast, my friend.
You're listening to the Zero to Travel podcast, where we explore exciting travel-based work, lifestyle, and business opportunities, helping you to achieve your wildest travel dreams. And now your host, world wanderer and travel junkie, Jason Moore.
Hey, it's Jason here with ZeroToTravel.com. Welcome to the show. Thank you for being here. Thank you for letting me bring a little travel into your ears today. This is the show to help you travel the world on your terms, to fill your life with as much travel as you desire, no matter what your situation or experience. Talking about two of my favorite topics today, music and travel and music. These things can't help but be connected, right? I mean, musicians, whether they like it or not, often end up living a travel-based lifestyle, and that can't help but seep into the music that they make. Of course, music is often used as a soundtrack to life, and on the road, that means you can't help but link certain music with perhaps a certain trip or a particular place. I can think about some of the soundtrack. I mean, some songs that I brought with me on a trip to Ireland, for example, they still run through my head, and if I hear them, of course, some U2 on there, but if I hear them, it takes me right back to that trip, is sitting on a bus, rocking through the Irish countryside and being on that solo trip through Ireland. It's just incredible, the power of music and travel when you combine the two. Of course, you just get flooded with memories, emotions. I mean, who knows what's coming up in your head right now as I even say these words. You're probably already getting images in certain songs that are popping up. Any way you cut it, music and travel are intertwined. And if you love these two topics like I do, I think you're really going to dig this show. It was really fun. Also, a bit of nostalgia, of course. Hear us reminisce about the days of mixtapes and the intimacy of letting someone browse through your CD case. You folks that grew up in this era, you know what I'm talking about. And if you didn't, it might be fun for you to listen in and be a fly on the wall to hear what it was like with travel and music back then. Anyway, one last reminder, actually a couple things. First of all, Rob's website, robharvilla.com. I linked to that in the show notes. Definitely recommend his podcast and book. And we put together a playlist for you coming out of this one. I also added some songs of my own on top of the songs Rob shares today over at zerototravel.com/Rob. That'll take you to a Spotify playlist. And don't forget one last thing. We have a free newsletter, zerototravel.com/newsletter. You can sign up for that if you haven't done so, to join the community there. Stick around on the back end. You're going to hear how travel was the spark that took one of these songs from an unused idea in the musical graveyard to almost 20 years later becoming a number one smash hit. And, of course, I will share with you my number one all-time road trip album. You might hear it come up in this conversation. Anyway, thanks for listening, and I'll see you on the other side, my friend. Enjoy my conversation with Rob. Cheers. Rob Harvilla, welcome to the Zero to Travel podcast, my friend. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. I'm thrilled to be here. Can you what is the etymology of the name Zero to Travel? I was curious.
I suppose the kind of like the 0 to 60 thing, like you can start from anywhere and you can just kind of get to where you're going.
There we go.
I think that was the Yeah, sort of the spirit behind it, right? Like travel's kind of accessible to anybody. I mean, well, we're going to talk about music a lot today, but I want to kick it off with a bit of travel, because one of the things that caught my eye in your bio on your website is, you talk about your professional rock critic for the last 20 years, all the publications you've worked with, you got the book and the podcast we'll talk about today. And then you say he lives with his family in Columbus, Ohio by choice. And those two words caught my eye because, Ohio doesn't necessarily get a lot of love. So this is your chance, Rob, to sell us on Ohio as a destination. Like, why should people visit Ohio, man?
I've been doing my part as an ambassador to Ohio for many years now. The Ringer is based mostly in L.A. Employees, of course, are all over, but there's a pack of people in Los Angeles. And I just would get a lot of like tweets, like mailbag questions, things of that nature, where people are like, why do you live in Ohio? Like, why don't you live in Los Angeles? And I'm like, well, so that's how by choice came to be. I was born in Cleveland. I lived in St. Louis, Missouri as a little kid, but I've born and raised mostly in Cleveland, Ohio, and in the suburbs thereof. My wife is from Columbus. My first job was in Columbus. That's where we met. That's where our families are still here. We lived out in Oakland, California for a long time. We lived in New York City for a little bit. But we always knew we would come back here, right? When we wanted to raise kids, when we wanted to be around our family. And that's what happened, and we've been here 10, 11 years, and I got a 13, 11 and a 4-year-old. I wouldn't say I'm the most adventurous travel type person at this point in my life, but I find Ohio to be absolutely delightful, the best of both worlds. And being here in Columbus, there's all sorts of cool, New York adjacent type cultural stuff going on all the time, but then you can retreat, to various Dairy Queens and Targets, and whatnot, a great many craft breweries. What else? The fair is the next Ohio State Fair. You can see Ice Cube at the fair. You can get a deep fried Oreo. You can ride the Tilt-O-Whirl, etc. Just many lovely parks, bike trails, things of that nature. That's Ohio, man. Ohio is a delightful place. I don't want too many people to come here, but I don't mind a few. So,
all right, there you go. Some love for Ohio. Hocking Hills, by the way, my hidden gem.
Hocking Hills. I go to
Ohio.
Hocking Hills every year with my buddies. We basically just sit in a cabin and watch football and eat copious amounts of, meat, basically. But Hocking Hills, old man's cave. That's a beautiful place. I went to college at Ohio University in Southeast Ohio. And still like the sort of the bucolic nature of that part of Ohio is still sort of ingrained in me, and Hocking Hills is absolutely beautiful. It's true. We're in a hunting cabin, but we don't hunt at all. We're too urbane for that.
You're hunting for the next chicken wing out of the
Yes, that's right. Hunting like for the next $9 IPA that somebody brought or what? Yeah.
Hey man, I live in Norway. $9 sounds like a deal to me.
Norway. All right.
Yeah, that's right.
How does one get to Norway?
Land of the $15 beers. One meets a Norwegian girl when they're traveling to Brazil.
Shazam.
One reconnects 4 years later. One moves to Norway and has a family. That's
beautiful.
That's how it goes, I guess. But I'm originally from Pennsylvania, so I was curious about the Ohio thing because we're neighbors, and I'm pretty familiar with Ohio.
What part of Pennsylvania?
Outside of Philadelphia.
All right, cool. I have a lot of family outside of Pittsburgh, in the Yins part of Pennsylvania. I understand. I can't visualize the map, but there's a Yins section and then a non-Yins section. And I believe you're in the non-Yins, but I'm firmly in the Yins. Yeah.
Okay, so for the visual thinkers out there, that's spelled Y-I-N-Z.
That's right. Y-I-N-Z.
Well,
Thank you for that.
Yins. The Yinzers.
Yins want another hot dogs? Yes, I do. I love Pennsylvania. Absolutely.
Yeah, you can get it in the context. Well, I mean, speaking of Pittsburgh, I am actually planning, and 90s music, I'm working on getting some tickets to go see Pearl Jam in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Pretty soon.
I saw that. I saw they announced shows, and I was hoping there was an Ohio date, but there was a Pittsburgh date. I'm like 3 hours away, and I should do that. Thank you for reminding me.
Do it, man.
This probably
Because we
already
can
sold
meet up.
out. But I want to.
No. The pre-sale hasn't happened yet at the time of this recording. You can still
dope.
make it happen. So
okay.
Yeah. We'll meet you in the parking lot there.
Awesome.
Okay?
Yeah. We'll toast during Better Man or whatever.
I love it. I do have some questions first just on being a critic, because I'm curious, you've been a rock critic for 20 plus years, as it said in your bio. I'm just wondering, like, what do you think is the most important role that critics serve for society? It's a serious question, though.
It is it's a very serious question. It's very funny as well, but it's very serious. I think I always wanted to be a rock critic, man. I grew up reading Rolling Stone, Spin Magazine, etc. It's alt weeklies in Columbus and Cleveland. It's all I ever wanted to do, and I just wanted to sit around and listen to music all day and think about it and write about it. And I guess that's what happens. So that's cool. I really admire critics who, are really well thought out, well worded, like takedown, right? Like just taking down a record, like the classic Pitchfork 0.0, et cetera. Like I do think that sometimes that's, necessary, even if it's just to sort of stoke conversation, just to cause a little chaos, et cetera. But I don't think I was ever good at the super critical part of being a critic, right? Like, I'm sure I've written plenty. I have written plenty of pissy, unnecessarily mean type stuff, in my younger years, especially. But I think for me, it's always been about the enthusiasm, and just trying to get people to hear music in a new way. Think about it in a new way, just come up with a new perspective, especially, when everyone's talking about the same records all the time, it's finding a new way to talk, about whatever, Taylor Swift, Drake, Arcade Fire, whoever is sort of the super overexposed person of the moment, but then trying to find, some other music that's less well known and trying to sell people on that. I think I always was a little better at the enthusiasm part of the job than the critical part of the job. And I think that's what's carried over the most into the podcast, into the book, because I didn't want to be the guy who's like, remember the music you loved in the 90s. Like, it sucks. It absolutely sucks.
Yeah, we're going to crap all over it now.
Exactly. I don't know why you ever liked it, and I'll explain to you why you should have never liked it. Like, that just never, I didn't deliberately go into it thinking that I would avoid that the tone would be celebratory the vast majority of the time, at least. But that's just sort of what felt right to me for the show. And I think that's sort of the way that I've always been, at least to an extent, is just I've been less adept, at saying why I don't like something than why I do like something.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's your enthusiasm for it shining through, of course. I mean, it's like, it's hard to, even though your job is to be critical, I can imagine, making music's hard. So when you try to make music and then you listen to somebody else who made music, you're already kind of like setting a baseline where, like, even like getting to this point where you have an album out or a song out, even
that's true,
is hard.
Yes, that's
so you've already kind of
true.
like won points in my book just by releasing something, No,
totally. Yeah, it's just, I played in bands in college, open mic nights, things of that nature. But it's like, yeah, I have never for 1 second come at this from the perspective of I could do better. Right. And I don't subscribe to the idea that, like, critics, like, if you haven't tried to make music, you shouldn't try to critique music. Like, I think criticism is important, and I think sometimes even harsh criticism is important, even if I can't really manage it myself most of the time. I do think in terms of, putting this music in a new context, like talking about it and taking it apart and sort of connecting it to other things happening in the world, like I love criticism, every bit as much as I love music. But yeah, it's just the celebratory tone always felt like the right one, for this show. And there is a part of that that's like, I can appreciate how hard it is, to make music, because I tried and it didn't go well.
Well, I mean, writing and podcasting about it to the depth that you have, what has that taught you about music that's perhaps different than what you learned from playing it?
The sort of one sentence thesis that I have developed over the course of the show is that, like, the music you loved as a teenager is the music you'll love the most in your life. Right. You know, there is definitionally like a pure nostalgic core to the show, and just talking about the music that imprinted itself. You know, I was in high school and college in the 90s. That's why I gravitated toward it, right? Like, I was a kid, I was a teenager, you know, this is how I formed my identity. And so the core of the show is sort of going back and talking about, you know, how that music imprinted me at that time and how it might have imprinted others. You know, I'm moving on now. I'm in the 2000s, right? Now I'm 2000 to 2009, and I'm like a young adult, right? I'm in my 20s. You know, I'm in Oakland. I'm in New York. You know, I'm still a kid. You know, I'm still wildly immature, and I remain so. You know, but it's a very different feel. You know, that made me a little nervous when I started it, and I'm tentatively heartened by how well it's going in my head, at least so far. But yeah, I do think that this is about, you know, hearing, you know, OK Computer when I was 19 years old and thinking it was, you know, the most beautiful and the most brilliant and the most important piece of art, you know, ever created by anybody. And I was privileged to be listening to it as I drove around Ohio. You know, I hope that something of that raw enthusiasm, you know, comes through on the show.
I love that. Well, I mean, it does. I mean, yeah, you mentioned the new pod, so we'll plug it here quickly because it's 60 songs that explain the 90s, but then underscore the 2000s because you're which I love. You know, I love that you just have complete disregard for the title. It's like, no, it's more than 60 songs in the first place, and then now we're in the 2000s, but we're going to keep the same. It's badass, dude. I'm just trying to give you some props here.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that. Yes, 60 songs that explain the 90s: the 2000s is a title for a podcast that is very funny. Ever. Thank you. It's very funny to me when I say it, and it's very embarrassing when I hear somebody else say it. That's when I realize how ridiculous it is. But yeah, we picked 60 songs arbitrarily, and we ended up blowing right past it. We did 120 songs from the 90s, and when it came time to retitle the show, it's like, do we you know, we got to keep the brand strong. You know, I don't know if SEO is even a concern for people anymore, but it's like, how do we let people know that it's kind of the same show, but it's totally different? It's just the 2000s, and I love it so much, and it's so dumb. It's incredibly dumb. I love it very much.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to bring it up because we're going to talk about 90s today. I asked you to bring a 90s bass list. I came to your work through your book, which is probably the reverse way that most people come into your work, because the book came after the podcast. I was listening to the 2000s one, and before we dive into the list, I had a question because I was listening to the one about MGMT Kids. And by the way, I liked your hat tip to James Murphy there, Losing My Edge. You were like, I was there. You're doing like there. The whole I was there thing.
That's right.
I picked up what you were throwing down.
Thank you for noticing. I feel validated.
I was a tour manager for a band called Matt and Kim. I'm not sure if you're familiar with their...
What?
Yeah.
Of course I know Matt and Kim. I saw them a bunch of times. That's phenomenal.
I was there. That's too wild. At that time in Brooklyn in like 2008, 2009. I find that it can be very sort of challenging to like take a meta view of like the present moment and understand if you're in some kind of era or some kind of like magical time for music or art or something. Yet, when I was there, I did feel that, like, that there was something special happening just through the people I got to interact with and like kind of the scene. All of that leads me to this question of like, I don't know, do you agree with that? Like, do you think it's hard to kind of assess an era that you're currently in? And like, how would you describe this current era of music?
Okay, I do think it's hard to tell what you're living through while you're living through it. I think everyone's instinct, especially when you're young and in New York City, and you're going to convince yourself that you're living through like a glorious era, right? And every band you see is the best because you're young and you're delighted to be in New York and you're seeing this band and it's the greatest thing ever. Like it's less about a whole, an objective view of whether this music is superior to other music or there's new innovative, life-changing things happening. Like it's changing your life, and that's what's important. Right. But I do think Matt and Kim, man, I saw Matt and Kim so many times. I do think the late 2000s in New York, in Brooklyn, there was sort of that run of like the Dirty Projectors, MGMT, of course, Animal Collective, like TV on the radio. You think about the early 2000s, the Strokes.
Peach Pit? Was that
another? Passion Pit, I believe.
Passion Pit, yeah, that's right.
Was the Peach Pit the
Peach Pit? That was the 90210 thing.
That's right. Okay.
That was the 90210 place.
Yeah. And what's okay, so like the Strokes moment, right? Like there was something legitimately happening there, but also Rolling Stone was loudly announcing rock is back, right? Like you have to sort of filter out, the hype comes on so fast. Like think about Seattle in the 90s, right? Like legitimately like a dozen fantastic, earth-shaking rock bands coalesced in and around Seattle, in the early 90s. Like legitimately there was a movement there, but there was also like the hype, like sort of the corniness of the idea of Seattle. You sort of have to filter that out. And it's only in retrospect, I think, that you can really wrap your head all the way around it. Like I think part of what I talked about in the MGMT episode is this idea that like that era has been absolutely retroactively rebranded indie sleaze, right? Like that was the vibe, like Cobra Snake and like American Apparel and like Vice and Gawker, like all like we're going to call that indie sleaze now, even though nobody on earth called it that at the time. Like there is this element that you can't really articulate exactly what was happening when you have some distance. But I do think that you have a sense when you're living through something magical that you are living through something magical, even if one's inclination, especially as a young person, is to believe that you're living through something magical like all the time because it's magical to you.
Well, I'm going to put in a request for you to cover Matt and Kim. Grand is such a great album. Everyone should go out and listen to it.
They were fantastic.
That was the album we were touring when I was with them. And what a show they can put on.
I saw so many bands that were so cool, right? Who were so like sort of diffident, and just sort of the tortured artist thing. And to have Matt and Kim come on stage and be like just so enthusiastic, like toward each other and toward the crowd, like just the legitimate joy, which is harder to convey and rarer to see, performed than you would imagine. Like just a breath of fresh air in any context, Matt and Kim. Like they were just always so cool and so fun.
Yeah, it's like you nailed it, man. Like walking in and seeing like even the most disgruntled venue, like stagehand,
sure,
go from like super grumpy mode to just like all of a sudden they seem like, oh my God, did that guy just like actually smile a little bit? Like
exactly.
That was the kind of the presence, that presence they brought, and
just smiling.
You nailed it.
It's
it's
so
really
funny.
Cool. Yeah. Genuine enthusiasm for just like, oh my God, I get to do this like for a living.
Exactly.
And I get to
like,
be here with these people right now. This
fun.
is freaking amazing.
This is better than many other jobs.
Well, we're both at work right now, isn't that?
We
fun?
are. I was going to say I don't know if it's better than podcasting, but it is a pretty great job. Yeah.
All right. Well, before we move into the list, are we living in some kind of special moment?
Right. You did ask that. That is harder for me to assess as a 46-year-old man living in the suburbs. I am constantly very conscious of the fact that this is not being really made by me or for me anymore. It is harder, and I feel more functionally, logistically removed from the center of culture than I was when I was a strapping young, super cool 22-year-old. What are we living through? There's a weird, what are we living through? I don't know. Like there's, a thing I talk about in the show all the time is like the 90s is the last time before the internet, and then the dying embers of the monoculture, right? Like I grew up in the 80s I grew up when Michael Jackson, Prince, Madonna, and Janet Jackson were just on MTV 24/7, and just it felt like there was this monolithic, culture that was just beamed directly into my head, from Star Wars, to Thriller, and the atomization of culture, once the internet kicked in, once Napster kicked in, once iTunes, now Spotify, everybody's listening to their own thing. Like, on one sense, everything's been siloed off in all these micro genres that are absolutely baffling to me. On the other hand, like, Taylor Swift made $2 billion on the Eras tour, right? Like, there's a weird dichotomy where it feels, like nobody sells as many copies as Michael Jackson or even NSYNC did most of the time, but there still are just these monolithic, Drake, Kendrick, Taylor, whoever type artists who are still sort of dominating the conversation. It's hard for me to get a handle, on whether the monoculture, ever really died, but in terms of like the coolest music being made now, like what I respect the most about it is that I don't quite understand it, and I sort of just nod my head knowingly at being confused, because that's what this music is supposed to do to a 46-year-old Ohioan living in the suburbs. I am not supposed to get it, Jason, and I don't quite, but I enjoy trying. Right?
I love that. Yeah, I mean, that's a great way to kind of, if that's your barometer, it's like, if I don't get it, that's a good thing.
Yeah,
that's like a healthy. That's a healthy perspective for us to
I don't know if
I think, man.
the people who hired me to do this job were aware of the fact that I had that approach, and they probably would not have hired me if they'd known, but it's too late.
It's too late, man. They got you now.
You're
killing it.
Let's see. We'll see.
What do you have here? I asked you to put together sort of your top sort of travel songs. We'll call it like ultimate road trip songs kind of from the 90s. I don't know. Yeah, you tell me what you put together for us today. We're just going to run through a fun list, which, as you know, like we talk about this in the show, these are completely subjective. This could change tomorrow, but we're going to have a little fun and put together a little playlist for you.
I was just trying to think about driving around in the 90s and what I was listening to, right? Like, there's the driving within, the suburban town that I grew up in. We drove from the Denny's to laser tag, to Eaton Park, to our jobs. We went and saw a movie, just those 20-minute drives, just driving around, sometimes with girls in the back seat. And I was like, we better play Candlebox. There are girls here. And so we'd play Candlebox. But it's just I sat in my buddy's car and just listened to 9 Inch Nails, for a solid, just hours upon hours every week, of 9 Inch Nails, Marilyn Manson, Tool, Alice in Chains, all of that, right? Like, there's the driving within the city limits. But I was just trying to think about, the 3.5-hour drive from my parents' house back to college. I tried to think about the drive, to my family, my grandparents in Pennsylvania, in Yin's country, and just what I would be listening to on my Walkman, on my little portable CD player, in my car, where you had the cigarette lighter attachment, right? You had to put like a black tape in the tape deck and then power it with I don't understand how that worked. I just tried to think about those drives, right? And what I would be listening to, whether I'm alone or whether I'm with friends, just driving to a show or driving from one college to another college. Like, I can't tell you that I was in Norway, or Brazil or any place like that. Like, it was not very exotic travel. It was mostly intra-Ohio travel at the end of the day, but it did seem very momentous to me at the time. And I tried to find songs that conveyed that momentousness.
Yeah, that's perfect, man. I mean, I felt the same way, like anytime, if you were 3 hours from home, that was in Pennsylvania or wherever you grew up. If you didn't travel a lot growing up with your family, that was like a big deal. That's
right. It's like the Oregon Trail. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. It was, it was a modern day Oregon Trail. All right. Well, I love that context, man. I mean, that sets us up. We're there. I'm right there with you. Like, you put me in your shoes. So let's rock. I don't know if this is ordered by like your top to the number one, or if you just kind of have
I could never rank these songs in order. They're all too important to me. They're all my children, in a matter of speaking. And so this is, if we were conceiving of a mixtape, obviously there would be questions of like flow and whatever. But I don't even know if I'm doing that. I just picked 8 songs. Man, you can put them in whatever order you want, quite frankly.
I mean, I have a number one that's sticking in my head for me personally.
Let's hear it.
I'm not going to share that later.
No? Oh,
no,
okay.
Afterwards.
All right. Okay.
I want to hear your list first. Okay. I want to see if it's on your list. I'm curious.
All right. All of that being said, the clear number one is Life is a Highway, right? Like that's just a gimme, I think. This dude, Tom Cochrane, I have to be honest with you and say I'm not super familiar with the rest of Tom Cochrane's oeuvre. I suspect that many 90s teenagers are the same. This song came out in 1991, and it's like it was ubiquitous throughout my teenage years, right? I think Rascal Flatts, I think a country band covered it, maybe 10 years later. But this is you're on a road trip, you got to play Life is a Highway, even if it's ironically, that's fine too. That's its own kind of honor to confer upon this song, but you got to do it, man. It's because it's true. If I know one thing, it's that life is a highway, and I'm glad somebody wrote a song about it.
Yeah, and you want to ride it all night long, right?
That's right, exactly. You play a little harmonica. Not a ton of harmonica solos in the 90s. Obviously, there were a few exceptions to that.
Well, I mean, Blues Traveler sort of made up for everybody else.
That's exactly what I
thought.
Right. Blues Traveler, that dude played enough notes in his harmonica solos to scatter harmonica solo notes across the rest of the 90s. He played.
Yeah, they're still floating in the air.
Exactly.
Somewhere.
Yeah, he's still gasping for breath.
I love it. All right. Impressive. I mean, very impressive harmonica playing.
I'm saying
Blues Traveler.
He got that vest with all the pockets to hold, I assume, his harmonicas. Yeah.
You need the harmonica vests. Yeah.
That's right. Shout out John Popper.
Yeah. Right. All right. Love it. Life is a Highway.
Yeah.
What else you got?
Man, so I cheated a little bit because this song came out in September of 1989, but I am claiming it for the 90s. Officially, right? Janet Jackson's Escapade, I think, is a necessary road trip jam, right? I love Janet Jackson so much, starting in the 80s. This is from Rhythm Nation. It's at the tail end of 1989, and it always made me mad that it was, because I couldn't do a song on it for my 90s podcast or whatever. But Janet Jackson's Escapade, just the do it's just perfect. This is absolutely perfect, and it's it's like, where am I going? I'm going to see, Ace Ventura, Pet Detective or whatever, but that's an escapade where I come from, right? It's like, that's enough for me.
Nice. I love it. We'll put this together, by the way, for people, and we'll link up to it so they have access to this playlist, because I'm writing these down. Funny Janet Jackson story, by the way, just a side note. I have a friend who lived in Vail. He worked at Vail Resorts, and his roommate taught snowboarding. And one of the people that came in one day was Janet Jackson. And apparently she was very sweet. And he got the opportunity to tell her that apparently at the time there was a snowboarding trick called the Janet Jackson. And it was some cool trick. So he told her about the trick, and she thought it was super cool, and she was very sweet. So anyway, that's all hearsay, but that was the first Janet Jackson thing that popped to my mind.
Your friend taught Janet Jackson to snowboard. That's what you're saying to me.
My friend's roommate taught
your
Janet
friend's
Jackson.
friend.
So
we can claim him as your friend. He's your friend now, I think.
Sure. Yeah. Why not? This is how the 90s worked, isn't it, Rob? People just would say stories like this. And then the next thing you know, there was no documentation. It just kind of spread.
Nobody was tweeting, man. Who
knows what it turned into? Nobody was tweeting, man.
Yes. I was thinking I picked Rift by Fish. I have to say that I'm not a huge Fish guy. It's not a dislike, but just I enormously respect, the fact that people who love this band like live this band and have seen them a billion times, right? Like I've seen them 2 or 3 times. I've listened to a bunch of stuff, bootlegs even, but it's like I understand enough to know that I don't know anything about this band. But I was thinking very specifically, I was like, I had a crush on a girl and I was driving to her house. I think we were going to go to Cedar Point, like with a big group of people.
The roller coaster land.
Exactly. It was like a work thing.
Yeah.
And I was driving from my house and it wasn't very far. It was like a half hour at most, but it was just, I went to a part of the city that I'd never been before, like a slightly more rural, like backwoods type area, and I was like really nervous and keyed up and like I didn't understand where I was like physically. And I'm like going to ride roller coasters or whatever. I got to pick up this girl. And I had just happened to put on the Fish album Rift. And I just, that moment and that feeling and that sort of nervousness and that confusion, that disorientation just sort of imprinted itself on me and on this record, and I can still, whenever I think about this record, I think about just that weird teenage feeling, and so I cherish Fish for that, even if, I defer, on to the fandom on most of the rest of it.
I love it. Everybody can relate to that, quote, weird teenage feeling. You just
yes,
described.
I live in that feeling. So
nice. Fish makes an appearance.
Fish makes an appearance, man. In that same vein, like I drove with my parents, right, to Ohio University to visit it for the first time. And it's like 3.5 hours away, and we're just we're just meeting with people and touring the campus or whatever, and so I'm sitting in the back seat of the car listening to my CDs, and for whatever reason I will never forget, I was listening to the Garbage album, the self-titled Garbage album, and the song, and that had like Stupid Girl and I can't think of the names of the songs. I'm only happy when
only
it rains, etc.
We're only happy when it rains.
Yeah.
Is that one?
But there's a song called that was the big hit, right? There's a song called Dog's New Tricks, and that was the song that was playing when the campus like appeared in the distance. And it's a really cool song, but like I think that my association with the song is that moment of my college, appearing before me on the horizon, and this is the song that was playing at that exact moment, and that turned out to be one of the more impactful road trips of my young life, because I did end up going to OU and
okay. Yeah. So it was just like really connected to this.
Yeah.
Sort of like, oh my gosh, there's the new chapter of my life. Like I'm driving into the new chapter of my life.
It was, I think what I was doing in that moment is like manufacturing like the biopic version of my life, right? Like I sort of did a needle drop on real life, and it's like, I just tried to force this idea that this was a momentous moment, and it actually was, and it actually remains. So I guess it worked.
Wow. The power of music in that.
That's right,
you
man.
Still remember that moment and what was playing.
I forget all kinds of very important things like daily, but I remember things like that instead. That's the trade-off. I don't think the people around me are too delighted by that a lot of the time when I forget more important things, but I do remember some stuff.
Yeah. Well, this is what you were meant to do this, I guess.
I guess so. I don't think I'm fit for anything else, so it's a good thing too. I was trying to think in the collegiate vein just about songs that I associate either with driving to and from school or just driving around. I sort of an area of music that I didn't get too much on the podcast. It's like I picked Rusted Roots, Send Me On My Way.
Oh, man. They still play, like, that's on commercials in Norway, Rob.
Okay, no, that totally makes sense.
It.
It's still in commercials here, I assume. I mean, that's a classic, right? That's an evergreen that is sort of burned into the brain. I'm sorry, this is like a bias, but it feels to me like it's burned into the brain of anyone who went to college, in the early or mid 90s. And that's what made me pick it. And the same with Tennessee by Arrested Development, which is just, these are songs that I associate with driving from like your college to your friend's college, right? Like a big thing about Ohio University is like we were famous, infamous, whatever, for our Halloween. You know, everybody converged on our campus on Halloween and got incredibly drunk, you know, and probably arrested, you know, in a lot of cases. But it became this sort of legendary, you know, at least within our own town thing. And so I just imagine Halloween weekends, you know, many thousands of kids, you know, from surrounding colleges and surrounding states, you know, all converging on our campus, and they are all listening to Send Me On My Way by Rusted Root as they roll into town. And then they get a 6-pack, a 24-pack of Natty Ice, you know, and then the rest is history.
Or no, Iron City, even better.
Oh, that's right. That's
right?
the Pittsburgh. That's the Pittsburgh guy.
That would
yes.
be. Because they were a Pittsburgh band, and no, it's funny because
were they? Oh, that's
right.
I should know that. No, that's right. I forgot.
I think so. I only knew that because I went to Penn State, and so you know it was all
right.
sort of connected.
Sure.
And there were so many people from Pittsburgh at Penn State, but you know, I thought like when you brought that up, the same kind of idea was that I thought that was like more of a college time, like definitely everything you described. So when I heard it on TV here in Norway, I couldn't believe. I was like, man, the staying power of that song is unbelievable. Yeah. Like it's still here, still doing its thing. It's crazy.
Yes. And so that's, I just weird that it never came up in the show. I probably should have done an episode on it, because I think you're absolutely right that it has this weird mystical staying power for people. Like it's one of those songs that you know so well, even if you never put it on by choice, right? I don't believe I owned the CD or anything like that, but just between the radio and hearing it in other people's dorm rooms and other people's cars, you know, it's like it's practically I did own that record, you know, and I heard it enough that I felt like I did, and like it's very cool that it permeated to the degree that it did.
Yeah, I love that's on the list. It's also musically just kind of it stood out musically. It was just a different sound, you know?
Yeah, and it's not unconnected to Blues Traveler, right? Like again, this is like there's kind of an organic scene of like more organic, you know, sort of jam band oriented, like not grunge, you know, like not distorted guitars, you know, not super mopey, you know, and to a degree, like that's an organic scene, and to a degree that all gets lumped together, you know, into sort of a corny rock critic idea. But, you know, like I don't know if they play like the Horde tour, right? But I sort of think about, you know, there's a jumble of bands like Spin Doctors, Blues Traveler, you know, Fish in their early days, though they sort of became their own, you know, mega entity. You know, there was this run of like sort of earthy, crunchy, you know, super dorm room, like Dave Matthews Band, of course, would be like the apex of that, right? You know, and they, of course, too became their own thing, but it's there's a lot of different things happening, and you can sort of lump them all together in your head as like a 17-year-old who loves it. And then the rock critic comes down from on high and sort of explains to you, you know, what was actually going on. And that's a little corny, but at the same time, like you do need, I think, both perspectives ultimately. But there was definitely a lot of that going on. I got two more here. You know, a record that I just drove around playing a ton was Dig Your Own Hole by the Chemical Brothers. This is, I just remember when I was, you know, a sophomore or junior in college, like, again, like I'm reading Rolling Stone, Spin, etc., and they're all telling me that electronica is the new thing, right? Like this is the era of the Prodigy, you know, Underworld, like the Train Spotting soundtrack, you know, Fatboy Slim, you know, things, Crystal Method, things of that nature, you know. But the Chemical Brothers I really, really got into. And I have these weird visceral memories of like pulling into the highway outside of my college to go somewhere, you know, and just starting the Chemical Brothers record, right? And so the song Where Do I Begin, which I think is near the end of Block Rocking Beats, it's got Beth Orton is the guest vocalist. You know, it's like an 8, 9, 10-minute song. You know, it like sort of feels epic, and it can confer this epicness onto whatever you're doing, whatever drive you're making, whatever you're going, wherever you're going, whatever you're going to do there, whoever you're going to see. You know, this is a song that appears in a lot of movies. or at least a few movies that I really viscerally remember. Like, this is just the kind of song, that can make something pedestrian feel majestic, and that's sort of my wheelhouse.
You mentioned that the idea of the music conferring onto the scene or whatever, like that. I guess that is what makes me, like, when you're talking about pairing music with travel, that's where like the mystery happens, right? Like the idea that you're like you're putting a soundscape over a landscape. And then it becomes something different.
That's a beautiful way of putting it. Absolutely. It's just, before I get in my car to go anywhere, even like, Kroger, I got to know what I'm listening to. Right. And so magnify that by 1,000 when I'm a teenager and I'm driving, even for like 1 or 2 hours, like how you're going to fill that stretch of time, was the most important thing to me. Like, far more important, like, do I have all the things I need to bring? Do I have snacks? Or all the people in my car who are supposed to be in my car? Like, none of that mattered half as much to me as what I was going to listen to when I went there. But like, a soundscape onto a landscape is the perfect way to put it.
Nice. Yeah, the CD book was always like,
there we go.
Who cares if Johnny's in the back seat? Where's the damn CD book? Like, make sure it's
people had, and I always envied them, like the thing where it was in the thing that I can't think of the name of it, but the thing you pull down to block the sun, the visor is the word I'm looking for. The CD case built into the visor, like that was an elite move, right? Like, I was always the guy with the CD booklet on the side of the seat, in the passenger seat, or in like the little console between the seats. But if you had like in the visor, you could just pull one out. That was the cool thing to do that I never quite got around to doing. But no, I would not think of ever driving anywhere without all my CDs.
No, that would be criminal. And I was the book in the middle guy too. It was always flopping around and getting in the way.
Yeah, it's inconvenient.
I could have just bought one of the damn visor things anyway.
Right.
Too late. If I could go back in time, Rob, and do anything to change history.
If that is your only regret, then I think you're doing pretty well. So yeah.
All right. Well, what's last? This is a killer list. What do you got?
Oh, thank you.
What's remaining?
So I remember, a drive that I made so many times and I remember so vividly is just with my parents to see my grandparents in Pennsylvania. They were about an hour outside of Pittsburgh. It's a 3-hour drive. I'm so excited to see them, but we got, a long time, not on the turnpike. I don't think the Pennsylvania Turnpike is an unpleasant, it's long. It's like stupendously long. I think I took it once to get from New York all the way back home, and I did not care for that. But it's, just a slightly new environment or a less traveled environment for me. And I listened to Out of Time by REM so many times on that drive. And I remember I had it like recorded on a blank tape, right? Like somebody else's CD or whatever. And it was one of those yellow and pink blank tapes, and I remember exactly where like side one of the blank tape ended, and there were just a few songs at the end of the record on side two. And that's how I thought the album was divided in my mind. Like I don't know if there is one drive that I associate more with one album than the drive to see my grandparents in Pennsylvania with Out of Time by REM. I could have picked anything. I picked Near Wild Heaven, which I think Mike Mills, the bass player, sings that one. And I love Mike Mills's voice very much, but it's just, if I put that song on now, it would feel like I was driving, that was physically being transported to Mather, Pennsylvania, and that's a very cool thing to me.
I love it, man. And I love, this is what's great. I got to mention the podcast one more time because you have the new one out, of course, 60 songs that explain the 90s, and then of course the one with the 2000s. And this is what you get. You get like this music history. You get this infusion of like music history and like, yeah come on, no, that's not true. You sell yourself short, Rob.
Okay.
No, you get to hear like the personal connection. I think is really the personal stories. Man, like, this is what matters, and I don't want to get on like some sort of riff about AI and everything, but like, this is the thing that makes us human, is the stories and the connections and the personal stuff behind things. That's what gives it meaning.
Yeah.
And so, man, I just appreciate that about your work. So,
well, thank you, man. I appreciate it. I'd like to see a computer prattle on about Rusted Root at incredible length. You know, it's just, you could never replace me. They absolutely will replace me eventually, but I'd like to think that they won't.
Coming up next, an entire show about Send Me On My Way. No,
that's right.
Well, maybe, you know, we're planting the seed here. I have some sort of quick hit questions for you I want to run through. And
all right.
Well, actually, before can I share with you my number one that kind of popped right to my head with the road trip thing?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, because I have kind of two from two stages of my life. And in the 90s, and I would also say that this band was, and I was going to ask you the same question because this will lead me to my next question. There was always like a band that you found from a mixtape that you got. Like people used to make these tapes, like friends would make tapes for you and then they give them to you. And that's how you discover bands. And you would find one band that like you were just like, oh man, like I'm so glad my friend introduced me to this band. And that's this band for me, Violent Femmes, Blister in the Sun.
Of course.
On the way to the Jersey Shore, Violent Femmes, just all the way. And I was such a hip hop head, but my buddy, like I introduced him to hip hop and he introduced me to like the Violent Femmes and all these other bands. And that was the band that really like I sort of connected with in terms of like, you know, instrument-based music in my teen years or whatever. So yeah, and then when I was in my 20s living in Colorado, I always had to start a road trip with, I know it sounds sort of cliche and ridiculous and melodramatic, but Where the Streets Have No Name, with like the long intro.
That's incredible.
You know, pulling out towards the Rocky Mountains and just like it's swelling.
That's necessary.
Oh man, I'm just getting chills. Just
me too.
Thinking about it.
Oh no, that's one of the best songs ever. One of the best intros ever. It's you don't be embarrassed about that for 1 second.
But I did do that at karaoke once in Japan, and that long intro, they were questioning. They were really questioning that long intro.
That's like 90 seconds of you just standing there with like the thing counting like 28 more bars, you know. It's like, oh, you got to think about that with karaoke. You got to think about the instrument breaks before, during, or at the end of a song. You got to figure that out.
You're right, man. I didn't. I used the time wisely. I ran to the bathroom. I put water in my hair and slicked it back. I put the glasses on, and then I came out in like a very Bono-esque kind of.
Man,
like
you made it a whole performance. You really sold it.
I try.
I'm impressed.
Try, man. All right. What is that band for you? Like the favorite band you discovered because your friend gave it to you on a mixtape?
I got a mixtape once that introduced me to like a lot of stuff, like Pulp. It started with Common People by Pulp, which is now, you know, one of my favorite songs. You know, it had some Cat Power on there. It had some Slater Kinney on there. Like, this is a very, like, I'm in college and I'm going to get into like cool stuff sort of scenario. But like, I remember that tape very vividly, you know, and just getting me into a lot of like the band Versus from, I think, New York, from, I think, Brooklyn. Like I can almost sequence that tape in my head now. And so a lot of stuff like that was, you know, in terms of the hit rate of stuff that I was hearing for the first time and then I would grow to love, I think it would be hard to beat that one. What else? I think like the Smiths. I don't remember exactly what mixtape or what circumstances, but I just feel like the Smiths were a band that I sort of arbitrarily, like just vaguely knew were important, you know, but I'd never really gotten into them, you know, in high school. But once I got to college, you know, it's another band I'd hear in a lot of other people's stereos, you know, and on tapes that they would make, or CDs they would play in the car while we were driving. And I think that a lot of my appreciation for them and like the songs that really started hitting for me were just stumbling across them, you know, on a mixtape or just with somebody else's, you know, road trip mix. You know, I can remember, you know, that's when Please, Please, Please Let Me Get What I Want really, really hit for me, I guess.
I guess the algorithm is the new mixtape.
Which is a drag, right? Like I prattle on all the time about the mixtape. The importance, the physical, like a burned CD is cool, right? But the physical tape that has a side B the concept of the first song on side B is so important and so vital and so necessary, to a good mixtape. Like I do, you have to handwrite stuff, and like draw on the case itself and like write out the song titles, and like people's handwriting is so important to the personality of it. I have a very romantic attachment to this day to the idea of the handwritten cassette mixtape.
Yeah. Likewise, man. Well, I mean, this is, sort of answering my next question, which was about the physicality of music. Because back in the day, it was more than just an auditory experience. I mean, you could mixtapes, of course, as you just described, but also when you got an album, or a tape or whatever, the ritual was that you would put it in and you would listen to it. And then, of course, while you're listening to it, you're like opening the liner notes and looking at the pictures and the album art and all that stuff. And then you have, like you mentioned, the distinction between like side A and side B, and like how that's thought out and how that vibe, how the like one side ends and another one begins and all that kind of stuff. How much like impact do you think losing the physicality has on listeners?
Yeah, I mean, that idea, of buying a CD, and treating it as this ritual, and reading the liner notes the first time you listen to it, that's sort of tied up for me in the idea that you had to buy your CDs one at a time, right? Like you would go into Camelot Records with $20 and you would come out with one album, and you would, you treated it as a momentous thing because it was a momentous thing. And it's like, even if I turn out to not like this record, I'm going to listen to it a billion times because I own it now. And just that ritual, and that's the sort of cloistering, like the lack of choice that you had versus the idea that I can type any song title into Spotify now and listen to it instantly. Like the idea of that just not being a thing in 1995, and it's so I buy the Cake album, and I'm really hoping the Cake album is good. And so part of how I'm going to determine right away whether or not it's good is I'm going to see what's happening with the liner. It's like, are there lyrics? Is there a picture of the band? Is there a lot of amusing, effluvia or whatever? Like these things are all very important. These things are all part of the ritual. And I do miss that. And I'm sure there is some tangible, like immeasurable but irreplaceable sort of thing that is lost now that music is so much less of a physical experience, and it's just sort of a background music thing, and just the algorithm, like just playlists from other people that you're sort of zoning out on. It's like the idea of just sitting with an album, and sort of staring at my stereo while it plays, that's not the way I listen to music now, even though it's my job hypothetically to listen to music. But I do miss all the elements of that ritual, and the liner notes, of course, were a huge part of that ritual.
Yeah, I don't want to sound like a purist, like, oh, back in our day it was better, that kind of thing. But at the same time, like anytime technology advances, it was. You gain certain things, but that doesn't mean you don't lose anything. So we're just acknowledging some of the things that are lost. That's okay. Maybe some of those things that you cherish, you can replicate in some way. Like if we listen to an album, and I've been thinking about doing this, like next time an album comes out with an artist, I should just, like, I can stream it, but I can just sit there and listen to the whole thing like I used to do when I was 15. But
there we go.
Who has time for that in this busy
Nobody,
modern world?
Not me. Yeah.
So that's the way it is. Anyway, maybe we got to have some listener parties or something. I don't know. Listening parties. Go. All right, quick, underrated or overrated? Gut reaction. Grunge.
Sure. Whoo. I'm going to say overrated just because it is so vehemently rated. I loved it so much, and I still do. But it feels like on a spiritual, mathematical level, I think that the farther, and this happens with any decade, like the farther you get from the 90s, the more the 90s becomes synonymous with grunge, and you lose everything else that was happening, from Rusted Root to hip hop, right? I just you think of the 90s, you think of Nirvana, and that's it. That's sort of the tendency the farther you get away from an era. But yeah, so just out of respect for every other musical movement of that time, let's say overrated.
Yeah, I think of Pearl Jam and Tribe Called Quest. Those are my two. Like,
oh my goodness gracious!
90s
Yes,
gods.
yeah.
You know,
there we go. Two fine tent poles for your operation. The Low End Theory and Vitology. There we go. That's all you need.
There you go. All right. How about greatest hits albums?
I have a tendency. I mean, I guess I'll say overrated because I personally try to avoid them because I have this weird archaic. I love the albums, man. Like I want the original spirits of how these songs were written and arranged, you know, and I want the bad songs mixed in amongst the good songs, you know. And so even when I owned a ton of CDs, I don't think I owned a ton of greatest hits albums because I vastly preferred, you know, to try and listen to the whole catalog or whatever. But, you know, I certainly can't begrudge, you know, what were they like, you know, like the Eagles, like Bob Marley would probably be the biggest example, you know, of artists where, you know, everyone owned the same CD and it was a greatest hit CD. Like those Beatles records, like the red and the blue ones, you know, like those were those were super important as well. And so I certainly respect the hustle of the greatest hits album, but it's just not the way I roll generally.
I got it. I got to give props to one though, Rob. And I think you have a connection to this artist as well, because it's one of the ultimate road trip albums of all time for me, Bob Seger's Greatest Hits Volume.
Oh, of course.
I mean, it's just so packed with like travel imagery and like the you know, the background singing and all the whole vibe and the organ, all of it. It's just, oh.
No, I'm just sitting here in my head being like, you can go from Night Moves to Turn the Page to Against the Wind. Like, oh my God, that's such a rad greatest hits album. That's beautiful.
Oh, it's the best. All right, if anybody wants some a greatest hits album to put on their next drive, there you go. All right, how about, I got two more overrated, underrated questions. Streaming services, as we just talked about. I'm going to get you in trouble with this one, aren't I?
No, you're not. See, no, you're not. You're going to try and trade me. I'm going to say underrated. Again, like it's such a cliche or whatever. If you had told me when I was 10 years old that I could pay $10, one day I could pay $10 a month to listen to basically any song, you know, ever, instantly. You know, as I was sitting there watching MTV with like my VCR set up to record, the second I saw Angel by Aerosmith, I just really wanted to hear the song Angel by Aerosmith. And it took me weeks until they finally played it like on a Sunday morning or whatever. And I managed to record it on my VHS tape. And that was one of the greatest days of my life. Like I understand as you say, what we've lost, you know, now that media isn't so physical anymore. And now that, you know, the album as a unit is not as important, you know, now that liner notes, even album art is not as important as it used to be. Like, there's something so inherently cool about the idea of getting to listen to anything I want, whenever I want, you know, that I do think I would say underrated, even if I wasn't employed basically by a streaming service, which I am. So. There you go.
No, it's true, man. If you could just have that at your fingertips, you know, you dream of that. By the way, was that one of the Alicia Silverstone videos? Because I'm just wondering if you recorded that Aerosmith song for the song.
No, this is this was 80s. This was on Permanent Vacation. It was a power ballad but the Alicia Silverstone videos, the crying crazy,
there's like an Alicia Silverstone trilogy.
The trilogy.
There you go.
That was of course incredibly important to me as a teenager. I can't deny that. But no, this is
on multiple levels for me anyway. You know,
of course, naturally.
Yeah. All right. How about Christmas music?
You know, on that Hocking Hills trip that I take every year, it's in early November, and just a couple of years ago, my buddies started insisting that we only listen to Christmas music because it is the Christmas season. And I was outraged at first because I grew up thinking that Christmas music season is the day after Thanksgiving on. right? Like I understand you walk into a CVS in like late October and they're playing Christmas music, right? Like I understand that from a capitalistic standpoint, the Christmas season is like 3 months long, but I always thought that Christmas music does not sound right to me if played before the day after Thanksgiving. Once that happens, like, Christmas music and nostalgia is like even more powerful, for all the obvious reasons. And so I'm rocking, the Charlie Brown soundtrack, the Muppets, John Denver and the Muppets. Like I love, what I love and people hate it and I don't understand. Wonderful Christmas Time by Paul McCartney. That's a fantastic song. I'll listen to that song all day. So I love Christmas music in its proper time, and apparently I am now at odds with the rest of the world on what that proper time is exactly. But I do love Christmas music very much. So underrated.
You're not at odds with me, man. I agree.
Okay,
Day after
good.
Thanksgiving, kick it off. And I kick it right off with Once Upon a Christmas, Kenny and Dolly, man. If you haven't heard it.
All right. Man, you really know how to get a party started, and I respect that. That's the way to start.
Well, on that note, that's probably my number one. I will listen to the album all the way through type of album, right? Like those albums that are so special that you can, like every song, you're just like, yeah. What's your number one, like listen all the way through album?
Okay. The album I probably listened to all the way through the most times historically is OK Computer by Radiohead. But what popped into my head the second you said that was Cake. Actually, I probably Fashion Nuggets. The one with the distance. The one with Frank Sinatra. Perhaps. Like I can reel off the song titles for you right now. Friend is a 4-letter word, basically, and so that's a record. Like Cake and Soul Coughing are sort of similar in that way for me. Like this is another I considered both of them, for the road trip songs as well. But those stick out to me as, song by song, full album experiences. I understand that for a lot of people, it's, a couple hits, not one hit wonder, but like just sort of weird fluke hit energy. But for me, like the sequence, and just the full immersion into the Cake experience was very important for me. So I'll say Fashion Nugget by Cake.
Okay, man, I'll have to give that one a listen because I've never heard that album.
Yeah, do it.
No, I mean, well, tying it back to the 90s, on a practical note and road tripping, sometimes having the listen through album was just like a practical choice because you're like, man, there's too much traffic. There's too much going on. I can't be switching CDs
it's
right
dangerous.
now.
That's right.
I need something I can go all the way through that's going to last for a while.
Very important practical consideration. Yes.
Yeah. I don't know, man. The 10,000 Maniacs MTV Unplugged album.
Ooh, that's a good choice.
There's always one song like I kind of want to skip through, but I can tolerate it. But the rest of the album, fantastic.
Do they start with These Are Days or finish with These Are Days?
No, they start with that.
Okay. Trouble Me. No, the 10,000 Maniacs got some jams. What's the Matter Here? Yeah, that's a band I don't think about enough or play enough now. Who are, These Are Days has major road trip energy. I totally get what you're putting down. Yeah.
Because if I could, like, ask for a magical teleportation machine that would, like, take me to a concert, I mean, I would go see Natalie Merchant sing just that voice, Well, I mean, yeah, on that note, okay, this is another sort of weird, and then I just have a couple more for you. I'm not going to keep you too much longer, I promise. The time machine, the magical time machine that can take you to see any concert of any era, and you get one. Like, I mean, you could go see Mozart, like you could see Elvis's comeback thing. You could
the Ring cycle. Yeah. Okay. Wow.
Yeah, the concert time machine, I call it.
The concert time machine. I know I'm supposed to say I guess the screaming at like the Beatles at Shea Stadium sort of distracted from the music, right? Like it's I'm trying to fight my natural instinct to find, like Woodstock or whatever. Like the first, if you were going to say like a concert in my lifetime, I loved this band Morphine. I was like a bass player and a singer and then a saxophone player and a drummer, and I loved them so much in the 90s. And then the singer, the bass player passed away, I think in the late 90s, and I never got to see them. I never saw Fugazi, who I've grown to love so much. Like I have all kinds of active regrets concert wise. If I'm being teleported back to potentially before I was born, I'd have loved to have seen the Talking Heads. I would have loved to have been in the crowd for the Stop Making Sense recording. Of the Talking Heads, that's a band they were never going to reunite, and I just totally missed it. And so that's a band I would have really loved to have seen live, and meant a lot to me, starting from sort of their MTV era when I was a kid, and then sort of getting into them, sort of understanding how much rock critics like them. I've been through a lot of phases with them, but I never got to see them. So I'll do that.
Yeah. Nice. Great choice, man.
Thank you.
The artists from the art, you think about like this is just a critic question, right? Like, do you separate that? Like, you could say Michael Jackson, or like more recently Dave Grohl, like he had the whole extramarital, like how, a lot of this is, some of it's just can be like, oh, this artist is, for some people it might be like, oh, like their values are messed up, but I love their music. And other things are just like, that person's a criminal.
Right. Sort of R. Kelly.
Like a convicted criminal, Yeah.
Yeah.
Like
R. Kelly is one of the gnarlier ones of our time. Puff Daddy is trending in that direction. Michael Jackson is an episode that I put off doing forever because I didn't want to deal with it, right? Because like this is a person that's been ingrained in my childhood and whose music I've loved forever, and I was working at the Village Voice, when he died, and we had to scramble to put together this giant cover package, and just of all these memories of him. And that's not somebody I can separate from my life, whatever I think of his personal life. I'm trying to think of someone who I don't listen to anymore because I just can't deal with it. And I don't know if there's anyone where I'm consciously like, no, that's gross. I mean, I haven't listened to R. Kelly in forever, it's a tough one, obviously, stuff like Dave Grohl, like the weird way he announced that he, had an extramarital, like that stuff, I can't say that bothers me on the same level, certainly, and so I'm trying to think, like just even, there's this band, the Posies. There's this power pop bands, the Posies. Like I loved stuff like that. Only Teenage Fan Club and Matthew Sweet, and there was a bunch of stuff, pretty ugly stuff about one of the dudes in the Posies, and it's just, especially, a band's that at least comes across as more sensitive, and more enlightened, even if it's sort of a superficial, you're assuming sort of way. Like that's a weird example of something for me where it sort of changed the way that I hear these songs when I hear them, but even in that case, like it's not like an active, revulsion to listening to them or the idea of listening to them, but you can't help but think about this stuff.
It's complicated, basically.
It's complicated is a great way to sum that up. Yes.
All right, last question, and this is just more wanting to get your advice because you're a guy who early on like had this dream. You had this dream, man, like you wanted to listen to music and write about it and do that, and then you did it. You realized your dream, and you grew up in Ohio. It wasn't like you're growing up in LA or something. And just through that experience for yourself, and I know you can only speak through your experience, of course. I'm just wondering, like, what's your advice for other people that are pursuing a dream like that? Like, what do you think like that taught you, or what do you have to share in terms of your experience?
This question always trips me up because I feel like the landscape when I was a teenager wanting to write about music for a living and the landscape now are just like, it's like between here and Neptune, right? Like I feel like my experience, you know, and the way I did it or whatever no longer applies. Like I was writing for alternative news, for alt weeklies, right? You know, and like a few still exist, but most of them don't. You know, like so when young people reach out to me now and like, how do I get into this? Like it's hard for me. I feel bad that I don't really know enough about the landscape, you know, to have actual practical advice. Like I used to say, you know, it's like you sort of find a place to write, like whether it's Twitter, you know, in the blog era, you know, I guess we're in the Substack era now. Like it's hard to establish yourself without, you know, just sitting down and writing for yourself, you know, and I don't think you're going to get paid for that, you know, but just working it out. See, I stumble over this question really badly just because it's also super hard now, right? Like it's just objectively, like it's not like Pitchfork went away, but just when all those wonderful people, you know, left Pitchfork, you know, it really shook me because I thought like if there's any music critic outpost that is sort of bulletproof and like so beloved, you know, that's always going to stand as like a bulwark against, you know, like AI or whatever. But like if even Pitchfork isn't impervious, you know, to this, that really shook me up. And so this is an even more terrible answer because it's all I ever wanted to do, you know, I felt like I didn't have a choice. And so that's how I went at it. And this is where I ended up. And so I don't know if I feel qualified to give any other answer than like, you do have to love it, you know, and you do have to understand that it is really tough, you know, and it is really frustrating at times. And it is really hard to find, you know, well-paying, you know, ways to do it. But if it's all you can imagine yourself doing, then like you will find a way to do it, and you will find a way that like I didn't think of because I'm old and out of touch.
No, that's perfect, man, because what you just shared there applies to any, you know, not so much your particular profession, but, you know, for anybody listening, pursuing anything, if you have that deep feeling like you're meant to do it, you'll find your place in it if you pursue it long enough. I think that's great advice, man. And yeah, great. I mean, how do you want to wrap this up, man? Do you have like a meaningful lyric you want to share or something, you know, something to tie this all together, man? You could think on that.
No, I don't have to think on that. There is no other choice than life is a highway and I want to ride it all night long. You know, that's a little more carnal, that line, than I realized before I said it out loud just now, but I'm sticking with it. It's truer words were never spoken. And I am grateful to Tom Cochran for that.
Awesome. I'm grateful for you, man. Rob Harvilla, thank you very much. We will link up to your website, robharvilla.com, where you can get all the things, 60 songs that explain the 90s, and then 60 songs that explain the 90s, the 2000s, plus the book, which was awesome. I would be holding it up right now, but I passed it along to my brother-in-law. I'm like, you have to read this.
No, I appreciate that. The word of mouth. So, yes, that's delightful, and I appreciate it. Thank you. Trying
to spread the love here. It's it's awesome work, man. I really enjoy it. So I really appreciate your time, and thanks for putting together the list and coming on.
No, thanks for having me. I was thrilled to be here.
Awesome. Take care. There you have it. Huge thanks to Rob Harvilla. Love his work, and it was such a great time chatting with him. Check him out over at robharvilla.com. Also, don't forget, one last reminder, zerototravel.com/newsletter for our free newsletter. You can sign up over there. A couple things before I let you go, then a quote. First of all, you probably heard me talk about it during the interview, my number one road trip album of all time, The Greatest Hits Volume 1 from Bob Seger and the Silver Bullet Band. And maybe that's not your kind of music, but next time you're in the car and you're cruising, perhaps you have a little bit of a dusty dashboard and you just, looking out at the scenery, just throw it on. Just throw it on right from track 1 in order. You'll see what I mean. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Well, everybody has different tastes in music, but I must say there's a lot of travel infused in that music. And I, for one, it takes me right out to the open road. And I also want to share this quick story about one of the songs you heard today. It was actually the number one song on Rob's list, Life is a Highway. Now, I went on Wikipedia to read a bit about that song, and an interesting fact. I'll read it straight from Wikipedia so I don't butcher this. Quote, it was written by Tom Cochrane. Cochrane has stated that Life is a Highway was originally conceived in the 1970s as Love is a Highway while he was still a member of Red Rider, but was shelved at that time because he felt the unfinished song was unusable. Following a trip with his family to Eastern Africa with the World Vision Famine Relief Organization, Cochrane revisited the song on the advice of his friend John Webster, an instrumentalist on the Mad, Mad World album. And so it goes. The rest is history, right? The song ended up becoming a number one album. Think about that. Travel inspired him to revisit this song. He had to go all the way to Eastern Africa and meet up with a friend of his to kind of get that song back on the radar, and then it becomes a number one smash. So you never know, just outside of music, what travel might do for you in some way. It's always a mystery how travel can somehow reveal things to us that either we've forgotten about ourselves or that we didn't even know was there, and it gets uncovered for us, and on and on. So just wanted to share that story because I thought it was a fun fact relating to this episode, but also that reminder that travel really can do some unpredictable things for us in our lives. Okay. I could pull some quote from anywhere, even the quote drawer, the trusty quote drawer right here on my desk, but why not pull a lyric from one of the songs that Rob mentioned? And of course, I had to go to the number one song. We got to finish with Life is a Highway. I want to ride it all night long. If you're going my way, well, I want to drive it all night long. Thanks for listening. Don't forget, if you want to check out that playlist as a companion piece to this, zerototravel.com/Rob. I put it together for you on Spotify, added a few songs of my own at the end as well. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time. Peace and love to you and yours. Cheers.
This podcast has been brought to you by zerototravel.com. Ideas and advice to make your travel dreams a reality.